Good evening. Tonight we ask a question that millions of Americans, and especially Minnesotans, should be asking themselves right now. When is enough enough? Seriously, at what point does political protection stop being public service and start looking like institutional immunity? Because if you are an average American citizen, if you are a small business owner, if you are a working class parent trying to survive inflation, taxes, rent increase, and grocery bills, and a government committee asks you for documents tied to a multi-million-dollar fraud investigation, you don't get to simply ghost them. But apparently, according to Representative Ilhan Omar, if you hold political office long enough, accountability becomes optional. And that brings us to ever-expanding Feeding Our Future fraud scandal. A scandal so massive, so embarrassing, so outrageously corrupt that federal prosecutors have already called it one of the largest COVID-era fraud schemes in the United States history. And yet, somehow, the political establishment still wants Americans to believe that there's nothing to see here. Right. Because apparently tens of millions of taxpayer dollars disappearing into luxury lifestyles, shell operations, fake meal counts, questionable political relationships is just another normal Tuesday in modern American politics. Let's walk through this chronologically because the timeline matters, and frankly, the timeline is becoming absurd. The Feeding Our Future scandal exploded into public view after federal investigators alleged that the individuals connected to a nonprofit food distribution program fraudulently obtained approximately $250 million in taxpayer funds through pandemic meal programs intended to feed children during COVID-19. Think about that for a moment. The money was supposed to feed hungry children. Instead, prosecutors allege massive fraud, fake attendance rosters, fabricated meal counts, luxury purchases, and a criminal network that threatened taxpayer dollars like a personal ATM machine. And while federal indictments piled up, questions surrounding political connections in Minnesota also began to grow louder. One of those names repeatedly entering public discussion? Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Now, let's be clear. As of this commentary, Representative Omar has not been charged with crime in connection to the Feeding Our Future scandal. But that's exactly why transparency matters. If there's nothing improper here, produce the documents, answer the questions, cooperate. That's what ordinary Americans are told to do every single day. Unless apparently you're politically connected. The Minnesota House Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee reportedly requested communication, financial records, donor information, and written responses connected to Omar's interaction involving individuals tied to the scandal. Lawmakers reportedly sought emails and text communication, records connected to donors, information regarding the promotion of the restaurants allegedly tied to individuals involved in the fraud scheme, communications connected to the Federal Meal Act and related lobby efforts. The committee then established a deadline, Tuesday, May 5th, 2026. Simple enough. Turn over the records, provide the documents, participate in the oversight progress. Again, if you're innocent and transparent, why fight oversight? Why ignore the request? Why disappear? Because according to Minnesota Representative Christine Robbins, Omar effectively ghosted the community. Ghosted? Imagine that. If the IRS sends you a notice and you ghost them, see how that works out for you. If law enforcement requests records from an ordinary citizen and they ignore the request, do you think the system politely shrugs and moves on? Of course not. But modern politics? Different rules apply to different people. Then came the failed subpoena vote. After Omar repeatedly failed to comply with the request, committee members attempted to move forward with formal subpoena on May 5th. And what happened? The subpoena effort failed in a split committee vote. Convenient. Very convenient. A 5-3 vote reportedly failed to gain enough support because Democratic Farm Labor members would not support compelling the records. So let's summarize this carefully. A sitting member of Congress reportedly ignores document requests tied to one of the largest fraud scandals in modern Minnesota history, and then the political system immediately circles the wagon. Again, Americans are exhausted watching this happen because they know exactly what would happen to them. If this were an average citizen, if this were a small town accountant, if this was a local restaurant owner, If this was you would probably already be facing charges, asset seizures, raids, subpoenas, or endless legal bills. But political elites continue operating inside what increasingly looks like a protected class. Then, as if things weren't already suspicious enough, another controversy erupted. Representative Omar amended federal financial disclosure forms after a major discrepancy triggered scrutiny. Originally, disclosures reported valued companies co-owner by her husband, Tim Minett, at somewhere between 6 million and 30 million. That's quite a range. That's not rounding error. That's not forgetting to expense lunch. This is a difference between modest wealth and politically power lottery wealth. Republicans immediately began to demand answers. Even President Donald Trump reportedly threatened investigations. Then suddenly, oops, accounting error. Now the revised disclosure reported placed the joint assets somewhere between approximately $18,000 and $95,000. Quite the magical financial disappear act. $30 million one day, less than six figures the next. Maybe Americans should try that one on their tax returns and see how quickly federal agents show up. According to Omar's office, the issue was supposedly caused by an accounting failure to include liabilities. Ah, yes, the classic, our accountant accidentally turned us into multi-million-dollar defense. Totally normal. Nothing strange whatsoever. And this is where many Americans are reaching their breaking point. Because the issue is no longer simply whether Omar technically violated a law, the issue is whether there is a meaningful accountability left in the political system at all. And at what point do investigators begin looking deeper? At what point do lawmakers stop pretending the controversies are isolated misunderstanding? At what point does someone finally ask the harder questions? Questions like, who funded that? Who benefited politically? What relationship existed behind closed doors? What communications are being withheld? What financial connections deserve deeper scrutiny? And yes, if transparency truly matters, Americans have every right to ask the broader questions. What vehicles were owned? How were major expenses paid? Who financed elite educational costs? Who paid tuition expenses connected to Barnard College? What donors, consultants, business relationships, or outside financial structures may have deserved public review? This is not extremist, this is oversight, especially when public trust has collapsed. Then came one of the most sarcastic moments of the week. House Majority Whip Tom Emmer had reportedly mocked Omar's accounting issue by jokingly asking whether her accountant was educated at the Learning Center, referencing a controversial daycare operation mentioned in the right-wing investigation surrounding alleged fraud in Minnesota. Now, whether people agree with Emmer's delivery or not, the reason the remark gained traction is simple. Americans are frustrated. They are tired of political scandals ending with carefully worded press statements, technical corrections, and absolutely nobody facing meaningful consequences. And frankly, many Americans no longer believe powerful politicians live under the same rules as everyone else. This is bigger than Ilhan Omar, much bigger. This is about a system where political figures increasingly appear insulted from consequences that would destroy an ordinary citizen overnight. This is about public trust collapsing. This is about voters wondering whether oversight committees even matter anymore. And perhaps most importantly, this is about taxpayer exhaustion. Because Americans funded these programs, Americans paid taxes, Americans endured inflation, Americans worked overtime while Washington flooded the economy with spending. And then, allegedly, a massive fraud operation exploited the system while politicians now dodge oversight requests. People are angry for a reason. At some point, transparency cannot remain optional. At some point, to cooperate with oversight should matter. At some point, political protection should end. Because if government officials can ignore document requests, amend massive financial discrepancies, avoid subpoenas through partisan protection, and still lecture ordinary Americans about ethics and accountability, then the system itself begins losing legitimacy. And that is where the story becomes dangerous. Not politically dangerous, institutionally dangerous. Because once citizens stop believing equal justice exists, the damage spreads far beyond one politician. Minnesota deserves answers. Americans deserve answers. And whether Representative Ilhan Omar likes it or not, the questions aren't going away. Not this time. I'm Haylee Ficuciello, Senior Correspondent for Englebrook Independent News. Good night.